personal horror story on New Year's Eve by you, Megan 3 MF Virgo, from r/Let's Read Official. I know this story is not like most featured on this channel, but I'm gonna share it anyway. This happened on New Year's Eve 2021. I was only 17 on a now deleted app called It's Me. It was an app where you could talk to people all around the world without the fear of showing your face, as you created your own animated avatar. Of course, looking back at the app was really an enjoyable experience, as I met people I'm still friends with today. But most people used It's Me could agree that it could get toxic. Many users, including myself, trolled parties, which were basically live streams where hosts could allow 3 other people to be talking with them, and the party guests could comment in the chat. One time I was trolling a party when I was new to the app, and the host was, unbeknownst to me, quite notorious on the app. He had already a large following. Before this, I had never heard of this guy, although I knew a couple of her friends. Her name was Kaylani and mine was Selena's. Usually the people I trolled didn't have the reaction I wanted. Example, arguing back, but this host started arguing back, and we went back and forth for a while, with the party getting many guests, and the comments were going wild. After the party, I texted her on the app, going back and forth with her again until we were full on beefing, and I asked her to pull up. Really, I didn't want to fight this girl because I was only arguing with her in the first place for S&Gs, but she was taking me so serious. She told me she lives in Chicago and I live in Milwaukee, so I thought there's no point in driving an hour and a half just to fight a girl I'd never even met. At the time, I was stupid and still had the mindset of a hood rat, so me pulling up to this girl wasn't far-fetched. It got to the point where this bitch wouldn't shut up, so I did something I still regret to this day. I told her I'd meet her at a place if she was with it, and she accepted. I hopped in my car and pulled her address in the GPS. Not gonna lie, the apartment building she lived in looked sketchy and ghetto, but I didn't really care because I was also from the hood. I brought my twin sister with me, just in case Kaylani pulled up, and had people with her to jump me. As we pulled up, I saw a girl who looked to be Hispanic and had sneakers and a hoodie on. I presumed it was her because of her accent and her clothes. I told my sister to wait in the car because she looked to be alone. I ran up to her and we started fighting. Not to brag or anything, but I've been in many fights growing up in the hood. So I do know how to defend myself properly. To be honest, I was getting the best of her when out of nowhere some guy proceeds to pick me up and try to separate us. At first, I thought it was some kind of security of the apartment building, but he wasn't wearing any kind of uniform. Actually, he looked quite a mess looking back, and he reeked of alcohol. He managed to somehow separate us, even though at this point I was going batshit crazy and Kaylani was still trying to get little hits in. By this time, my sister came out of the car when she saw the guy getting involved, and presumably Kaylani's friends who came from inside the building tried to hold her back. After we were separated, the guy literally starts dragging me rusty, beat-up black Honda that was parked nearby. I started fearing for my life and screamed my sister's name. She came sprinting, but the guy had already opened the trunk and threw me in. Trying to shut the trunk, I was kicking and screaming, but he was really strong and managed to shut the trunk. My heart practically stopped when I felt the car speed off. I can still remember my sister's screams for help. We drove 5 minutes and I'm claustrophobic, so I frantically am trying to get out of this tiny trunk, texting my sister, and luckily she informed me she had called the police already. She was following the car. After a few minutes, the car stopped and he lifted the trunk and dragged me by my hair into some house that looked run down and dirty from the outside. He practically threw me into the house, and I saw my sister running after the guy with the baseball bat we brought just in case anything bad was about to happen. She managed to get one good hit in on the man with the bat, but he kicked her off and locked the door. Even though I heard sirens nearby, I was still terrified of what he was going to do to me. He dragged me into some room in the back of the house, and the whole time I'm fighting him off as best I could. The police burst in a couple seconds later, however, and tackled the man. Surprisingly, he didn't resist and was quite calm, letting the man cuff him. I was reunited with my sister, and in that moment I realized how precious life can truly be. Ever since that day, I changed for the better. Me and my sister no longer beef with anyone, and we definitely grew up a little bit. In the past year, after the incident, Kaylani left the app. It is really windy out. Wow. I decided to call it quits me soon after as well, because many people I was cool with started moving on, and I wanted to leave the memory of that day behind. I never told anyone on It's Me what happened, not even my friends, as I was afraid no one would believe me. If there's anything to take away from this story, it is not to make dangerous decisions like I did that day, pulling up to a sketchy neighborhood to fight some stranger. It's Me app was shut down on August 10th of this year and was replaced with the new app code name. Recently, I moved back to England with my sister. We both go to an amazing college here. I hope you all have a safe and Merry Christmas and an even better New Year. Well, I'm just glad that people make it through these things when they decide to do things like that on New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve 2011, my eerie start to 2012. J-E-H on R no sleep. I didn't have much planned on New Year's. My friend Aaron was having a party, so he invited me and two friends to join in. Me, Aaron, Nat, and Anthony are chilling in this basement. At around 9:30, Aaron gets a text from a number he doesn't recognize. It says, "Yo, I'm outside." So he goes outside to check and finds that no one's there. He comes down and asks if we have that number in our phones, and none of us do. A little while after, Nat gets a text from the same number. It says again, "Yo, I'm outside." She replies, "Where are you?" And then she says, A text came back saying, "Turn around." We were all in the basement together, and clearly no one was behind her, so we figured that someone was trying to prank us. At around 10:45, I get the text, "Yo, I'm inside, same number." So now I'm really curious, and I want to figure out who this person is. I text back and say, "Alright, I'm coming out." I promptly get a text back saying, "Don't worry, I'm already inside." Fast forward 2012. At 12:10, we're upstairs with everyone else watching the NBC New Year show. I decide to text this person, "Happy New Year, love you, XOXO." I did this just to get some sort of reaction, hoping they'd reveal themselves. But I get no reply until around 1 a.m. And when I'm on my phone, it said, "I'm waiting by your car." I didn't think too much of it. I just text back, "What's my license plate number?" It took a few minutes to get a reply which said, "You drive a Honda, right?" Big deal, lots of people drive Hondas. Around 1:30, I'm putting on my shoes to leave and I get another text. "I'm ready to leave now, are you?" Now I can't lie. That was a timely text, so I got a little rattled, but I put on my shoes and went out the door. I had to drop off Anthony and Nat, so we walked to my car, and before going in, I checked the back seats in the surrounding area. Nothing in sight. We get in the car. Now, here's where things get creepy. Now, I could have made a 3-point turn and drive out the way I came in, but I was too lazy to reverse. I drove straight, thinking that I knew the area well enough to make the proper turns to get out. I ended up making a right turn prematurely, and I quickly realized I'd made a wrong turn. My phone vibrated in my jacket, and I got a text. "You're going the wrong way." Okay, this shook me. I stopped on the side of the road. I wasn't lost or anything. I'm in the suburbs after all. I just made the wrong turn. I stayed put until a couple of cars passed me. I turned to the back seat and asked if Nat or Anthony were playing around. They said they had no idea what was going on. I tried to put what had just happened behind me and continued driving. We come to a stop sign where we have to make a turn onto the main road. Anthony's house is on the left. I decide to turn right. As I'm driving, Anthony says, "Where are you going?" I tell him I just want to see what happens. I drive about a kilometer up and turn into an empty parking lot in a plaza. I do a big circle and then come out the way I came in. I'm a little relieved at this point because I haven't gotten a text. I pull out and head towards Anthony's house, but then my pocket vibrates. Stop with the detours, I'm still here. What is happening? I'm flipping out. I turned off my phone and left it at that. I didn't drive all the way home. I asked if I could chill at Anthony's for a bit, but I ended up sleeping over. What creeped me out was the timeliness of all these texts. But what sealed the deal was the punctuation and grammar. I know that sounds silly, but friends don't really text like that. Edit 1. Just adding that my other friends who were out and about on New Year's Eve didn't get any messages. So whoever this person is knew that me, Nat, Anthony, and Aaron were all together. Edit 2. I got the third text 6 when it came out, and I didn't want to carry that number over. Oh, I got the S3 when it came out, and I didn't want to carry that number over, but up until then I had the number on my phone for show and tell. I hated scrolling through my conversations and seeing that number. People I've told this story to have always tried to call the number, but they'd get a message saying the number doesn't exist. I haven't dived too deep into this. One hand, I felt that something really bad could happen if I kept probing, and nothing has happened so far. But on the other hand, I don't have any closure, and sometimes I get paranoid about getting another message. Edit number 3. I just remembered that I do have my old phone in my closet still. If you got serious skills, Liam Nielsen, and taken type skills, shoot me a message. Alright, I'm not gonna lie. This sounds like it's either something paranormal where maybe they were messing around with a Ouija board and got a really evil spirit, or do they had a stalker, and this is 11 years ago, so I wonder whatever happened to them. Be interesting to get an update. But I would say yes, that is a eerie start to a year. Just would freak me out. You sarcastic bitchy wolf. New Year's Eve horror story. I don't even know if this is the right place to post this, but it was incredibly terrifying and still gives me chills. As cliche as that sounds, I know some people say these stories are 100% true for immersion, but believe me when I say that this is 100% true. 3 of my friends and I were spending the night together on New Year's Eve about a year ago. We decided we wanted to spend the night in a tent outside really close to the woods. We're laughing and messing around, normal teenager things. Then we heard this rustling outside and leaves, figured it was an animal or something. We shrugged it off. At this point, it was nearing midnight and we had a flashlight on in the tent. We're blasting music, but that's when all hell broke loose. We heard this chirping noise outside. When I say chirping, I don't mean like a bird or a raccoon, but this unearthly chirping that didn't sound like an animal at all. In complete fear we were about to be ambushed, I demanded my friends temporarily turn off the lights and the music. At first they looked at me like I was crazy, but I strengthened my tone. Turn it all off now. And at this point they knew I was absolutely serious. So they turned it off, and chirping that didn't sound like anything. My friends and I were really scared, but I was, a little bit braver than the rest of them. I'd been taking karate for about 4 years, and I'm very, very tall female, capable of taking down a grown man. I figured I could take whatever was out there, or at least I could carry on one of my friends if we had to run away. They all tried to play it cool and said it must have been one of those scammer firework things. But I could tell they were all scared. As scared as I was, that's for sure. We carried on messing around for a few more minutes, desperately trying to forget about the screech chirping things outside. But then we heard it. ourselves, so they start asking me questions as to what I thought it was. I was the friend who was into all these paranormal different things, and I still am, but I've never been a paranoid person. So they asked me, I told them just as a suggestion that it could be a SW or a flesh gate. But it's because I read it somewhere that they mock the voices of your friends, emit noises that they think will lure out their victims. I only said this because I thought that could explain the screaming chirp, but I think they were really scared. Then we heard it again. At this point, everyone was scared. One of them eventually called her older brother to come hang out with us for a while. While he was there, just our luck, we couldn't hear the chirp screech anymore. We hung out with him for a while until we all decided to go on a walk. He came along. The walk was fun. My friends were terrified because we were walking around in the dark, but I've always liked the dark, and it was so fast and mysterious. I was hoping we could find the flesh gate, so my friends had stopped acting like stuck-up little shits that weren't scared, because I could see that they were. Part of me was also terrified to see what would happen if we stumbled across one, but her older brother had a knife with him, and I was prepared to stab it if he wasn't. Now, fast forward to later into the night. We were blasting music again and playing with a multicolored strobe light. Probably not the best way to avoid being jumped in the night, now that I think about it. My friend's brother had just left us his knife in case we heard anything else that night. My friends all decided that I was the only one who would be brave enough to actually stab someone or something if it came to it. I was in charge of holding the 6-inch knife all night. Thankfully, it was in a sheath because despite my training, I'm quite clumsy. Not gonna lie. Especially this late into the night, I couldn't help myself taking the knife out of the sheath because it was so interesting and beautiful. Very intricate design. And then, as I'm observing how beautiful this knife was, there it was again. The same chirp screech. I unzipped the tent to look, knife drawn, and heard something scurry away quickly into the woods. Since my friends didn't hear it, I let it alone. Everything was fine for the rest of the night, that is, until I was the only one awake. I heard this horrible scream howl much more blood-curdling than the chirps. It kept getting closer to the tent and then backed away, like it somehow knew I was the only one awake. It circled us, made itself sound distant, then come back with another howl. One of my friends briefly awoke and told me it was probably someone having a party, but I could tell she was just saying that so she could get some sleep. She desperately needed me, however, I could go for 3 days straight without having to sleep once. I was perfectly fine without sleep unless I had a long day of school the next day or something. Believe me when I say I didn't let my guard down, not once. I listened to this thing and the location the cries took place. I wasn't about to let some horrible flesh gate or something paranormal come and kill my friends and I on a night that was supposed to be fun. I drew the knife a few times and practiced slashing the air in case it attacked me, but it never did. Nope, it just spent hours taunting me, trying to draw me out. I was incredibly tempted to run out there just to get a look at it, but I knew that was exactly so it could pick me off because I was the main threat. Then take my friends. There was no way in hell I would let it anywhere near my friends. The other brother had left to go to a friend's house later that night as well, and the friend we were all staying with lived with her grandmother, so no strong men. I lived around the neighborhood, and both my mom and dad were home. My dad is a big guy, standing at 6'2" and strong, but it would be too far to run. I couldn't go out. I couldn't do it. I couldn't go out to see what it was, even if I wanted to. Even though I'm pretty fast, I was weak considering how late it was, and I would become this thing's prey. Knowing this, I just laid back, knife at ready, listening in absolute horror all night. You don't know what true vulnerability is until you're on the outskirts of the woods in a tent with 3 lives in your hands while some paranormal creature is hunting you, teasing you, and you only have a close combat weapon that you're not even certain will put a scratch on it. I sat there in silence until around 6 in the morning, when I was certain it had stopped. I couldn't take it anymore. The damn thing had driven me insane. My work there was done as I was certain it was gone. I left the knife on my pillow and a note that said I went home and I wasn't dead, so I could reassure my friends when they woke up later on. I began to walk home to my house when the streets poorly illuminated by street lamps. There weren't that many, leaving a ton of dark places that I couldn't see even if I tried. To make matters 10 times worse, my glasses were smudged and I could barely see anything out of them. I knew it was better to my advantage if I kept them on, though, because I'm blind as a bat. I scanned my surrounding area the entire way to my house, keeping my eyes on every direction this thing could possibly attack me from. This thing was probably just waiting for me to get alone, but I wasn't going to let it do anything to me. I finally got to my house. The door was unlocked. To my relief, I could get in without my parents hearing me. Unfortunately, this was 5 in the morning, as I mentioned before. Clumsy as ever, I bumped into everything as I tried to navigate myself to my room, where I forced myself to go to sleep. After that, when asked, my friends would say it was a scream or firework or something, like some animal, but I can tell they were scared and just trying to make sense of it all. Me, I was trying to make sense of it too, but honestly I just couldn't, and I knew what I heard. It was much worse than they could have imagined. They probably thought I mentioned this paranormal creature and the SWs just to scare them, but I truly believe it was one of the two. Nothing like this ever happened again, but there's a reason we haven't been answers on New Year's Eve. Not on who or what had killed the 2 boys and the terrified mute girl. Couldn't answer them in either case. We didn't have much to do in my town other than drink, so our debate sat. The bar went in circles before it fading over the next few months. We are collectively just about to forget about the whole thing when the next New Year's Eve rolled around. The night's celebrations were rowdy, sure, but slightly overshadowed. More than a few people had theorized there might be a serial killer who had chosen that night annually for his killing ritual. We all kept a nervous eye on the shadowed distances outside, the reach of the street lamps and porch lights. Just after midnight, screams echoed out from a back lot behind the old hardware store. A tremendous burst of drunk, angry, and protective men surged from the main street bars, myself being one of them. We'd amped up all night to potentially mass mob a serial killer, but none of us were prepared for what we saw. 4 limbs, a torso, and a head lay scattered around the lot, but not even in pieces. Some tremendous force had sliced them into bits. Worse, the same mute girl from the year before sat huddled behind a dumpster crying and covered in sopping wave of blood. Harold, our oldest homeless man, had been murdered, and that girl had become the primary suspect. The police took her and brutally interrogated her. Our town was simultaneously silent and full of whispers, gossip the entire time. Nobody knew whether to feel bad for her, whether to demand she be treated more fairly. If she had killed those people that way, she was totally insane. So I fought down my usual urge towards fairness and stood by while they continued hunting her. We all did it. Apparently, after 4 days, she finally cracked and told them what she had seen both New Year's Eves. We could only guess at this, though, because the chief of police left the station with a haggard look of suspicion and fear without a word. The other police officers escorted the girl to the psych ward of our local hospital and left her there indefinitely. They looked for a hypothesized serial killer for a few months, but neither seen out any forensic evidence. They were forced to give up. Not that it mattered. The next New Year's Eve, they were all killed just after midnight. A cyclone of gone and great gore and grated chunks exploded across Main Street. I was sitting in Roddy's pub when the other guys, when suddenly the window went dark, red with blood like rain. The thumps scared the living daylights out of all of us, and we ran to the door when we realized all the windows were covered from top to bottom with this red, thick crimson liquid. I can't describe the scene outside. Suffice it to say, the sewer drains nearly overflowed. Our entire police force, several doctors, and numerous patients from the psych ward were later pieced together out of the morass. Sitting dead center was the same girl, knees curled up, arms over her head as foot-deep blood swirled past her. Yet again, she had been the only survivor. Only this time we knew we were not dealing with a serial killer. Something far worse was happening. The girl, of course, had more or less lost her mind. She was also still drugged up from the ward and told us everything in a stunned haze. I truly wish she hadn't. The nature of the anomaly was such that we could not speak to the media or ask for help from outside sources. We simply wouldn't be believed, and there would be more questions than answers, getting us all in deeper trouble. Though the mess was horrendous, we cleaned it up. We cleaned up the streets as best we could and gave them all a good Christian burial. Those hours of picking up body parts with my numb garbage bag gloved hands in the cold light of New Year's Day rank among the second worst of my life. The first worst hours came next New Year's Eve. We were all in it now, a down secret among the men. The anomaly was going to come back and we had to be ready. Part of me hoped it wouldn't return. The rest of me knew with a sick feeling that it would. It had been growing bolder each year, starting underground and then slowly moving into places that were increasingly public. If we didn't stop it, Lord knew we were going to get it next. Last New Year's Eve, we sat waiting in our houses. There was no drinking, as we were wanting to be sharp. There was no gathering because it would find us. There were no last-minute goodbyes or phone calls. We didn't intend to die. It came between one blink and the next, just before midnight, and just had said, she was my first sight. This would be her fourth time through nightmare. She didn't scream, she didn't move, she seemed completely resigned to her fate. Recovering from the blurry, odd feeling of being taken, I looked around at the others. There were 43 men we'd expected. The girl and several wives and children. My heart sank as I saw them. Someone had screwed up. Beyond our scattered group, strange ivory tiles radiated out to meet smooth alabaster walls that arced around us in an unbroken circle. The ceiling had been just reachable by a jump, held the same tiled pattern. I took this in quickly, then focused on the anomaly at our center. It was as she had said. 6 thin black circles rotated on an axis to form the framework of a sphere shape. Each circle seemed to be made of impossibly thin material, like a fine wine honed into razor blade sharpness in every dimension. An ivory sphere hovered inside it, blank. There was very little delay for getting our bearings. The ivory sphere lit blue while people were still cussing and looking at each other. The girl screamed to make them pay attention, and we looked down at our feet. A large number of the semicircle tiles on the floor had turned blue. I touched one and it rose about a foot up and turned green. Getting the idea, everyone else started running around and hitting the blue tiles, raising them up and turning them green. While the sphere began humming louder, as it reached a crescendo, we realized that all the tiles had been activated, but we weren't sure if that was what we were supposed to do. Apparently it wasn't, because the sphere reached a high note, went silent, and altered one of its surrounding black circles. The circle rotated until it was flat in the air and then began expanding rapidly. People screamed, but we all ducked in time. We'd all seen that this thing had done to everyone else, and we weren't about to get caught off guard. The worst injury was the removal of a small tuft of hair from old Benson's mop. We crouched down, relieved, until the lights on the floor changed and the humming began rising again. All these factors and certain details of the room I cannot relate to you told us the terrible truth that it was a puzzle, exactly as the girl had told us. A child's puzzle, built by someone or something so exotically different from us that we found it murderous rather than simple. There were no instructions, the same way we don't put instructions on, say, a plastic tower with several brightly colored concentric rings of different sizes. The child was simply expected to try different permutations and have fun with it, no danger involved. But our ringed tower toy would seem very different. To say a creature lethally allergic to plastic, it might ask, why would anyone make this? What monsters would create such a torture device? And we asked those questions too, as we failed to figure out the addition of red to the tiles. The second black circle around the sphere split into numerous vertical lines and began spiraling around out through the room. Mercifully, these were slow, and only a single hand was lost among the crowd. One of the wives screamed in pain, but her husband was there to bandage her stem the bleeding and grab her loose hand for possible reattachment, assuming we got out of this in time. The ceiling tiles were separated. Objects from tiles below them. As the sphere began humming again, we all realized that at the same time jumping up, we hit red tiles, which turned blue and lowered. Before we hit green raised tiles, which rose further and turned back to blue. To blue. The new color yellow only turned white when struck. The men threw out numerous theories. Did it have something to do with the primary colors? We were supposed to make patterns. The two black waves had halted at the extremities of the circular room. Should we try to take advantage of the new small gaps in the sphere's defense and destroy it directly? Whatever we were doing wasn't working. The girl warned us that the deadly black energy lines would come back from the outer walls. We all managed to duck as the first ring shot inwards and rejoined the sphere's outer shell. We all thought we were actually going to we were getting somewhere. We all thought we could figure it out. Maybe we could have given enough time. But when we looked around for the fourth change, we saw nothing new. Mary Barker stepped on a white tile and it rose and turned blue. The game hadn't been designed for us. There was only one chilling conclusion. Something that did not even the thrice surviving girl had known the puzzle involved colors we couldn't see. It hadn't been built for our eyes. Nope. Collective hysterical screaming drowned out everything else. Our plans and strategies suddenly seemed stupid and ill-fated. We literally had no way to win. Every single person in that strange otherworldly trap was going to die. Except there was one other catch. a sort of fail-safe. I suspected it was the way the girl had survived 3 times already. I was certain she'd kept it to herself on purpose. It was why I brought a knife and a gun, both hidden in my clothes. None of us intended to die, but I intended to die the least. The game led out in the middle of a deep backcountry woods. Initially, I thought this meant that the anomaly was simply moving on a straight line to nowhere. Later, I would realize it was actually halfway to the state capital. There was no core explosion this time. The black lines of energy had not torn apart nearly as many victims as before. All the blood and organs and intestines were still in the dead, held mostly together by their empty vessels, as the only survivor, exhausted and covered in blood, was myself. I walked straight home and took a shower. My first thought was not to tell anyone. I could never explain the disappearance of all those people, and certainly not a clearing in the woods filled with dozens of bodies. You see, though the anomaly was built as some sort of puzzle for a child, for a species unlike anything we can imagine, it was designed to be a multiplayer competition. The game automatically ends when only one participant is left. I kept this burden, this nightmare trauma and guilt to myself for an entire year. Tonight, I speak. Maybe I've lost my mind. I did think I could live with this and keep the secret to myself, just as the girl thought she could. She only cracked once the first time and told Harold, the homeless man. The police beat it out of her and sent her to the asylum. The cops, the doctors, and the other patients paid the price. We men heard it from her, and some of us told our wives and children, consigning them to death. That's another complication of being from a totally different culture than the anomaly. Just talking about it acts as an invitation to the yearly game. We just don't know how to turn that invitation off. It might be as simple as a spoken phrase or mental rejection in a particular manner, unknown to us, or it might be something that requires organs or perceptions we don't have. In any case, this year, tonight, I speak because I have no idea what might happen if I'm the only player. I tell myself that we can figure out the puzzle if we have enough people, enough smart people, enough different people, that maybe someone has an inspiration, or maybe someone has eyes that can detect the unseen colors. But to tell you the truth, I want as many people as possible because I'm just scared. Scared and sorry. Happy New Year's Eve. I will see you at midnight. That wasn't a true story, obviously. It was Arno's Sleep, but I think I read that one a couple years ago and I really like it. If you want to write in the comments what your scary New Year's Eve story is, I'd love to hear it. Or you can go to my Reddit thread, JodiAsmr, and write it there if you'd like. Yes, I started a Reddit thread. After all these years of being on Reddit, I figured, why not, right? So if you're so inclined, please leave sense to stay indoors as much as possible. But every human being has a breaking point, and mine was 8 days of wandering around my one-bedroom apartment. I had talked myself out on Zoom and run out of conversations to talk to myself about. At 10 p.m. New Year's Eve, I decided to get some air, allowed within the rules of Tier 4, and go for a quick walk. I walked around the perimeter of the local park on all the main roads. This takes about 40 minutes. The plan was to stop at a local grocery store, pick up a bottle of red wine on the way back. I stepped out with a mask firmly affixed and started walking. One thing that I was not prepared for was the eerily empty and almost silent streets. As it was just below freezing, I decided to hustle and cut through some side streets first. On hindsight, this was a big mistake. Navigating myself through very quiet side streets, I neared the park when I saw a van, Mercedes Sprinter size, turn in and rapidly approach me. Deciding to let them pass before crossing, I came to a halt. The van began to slow as it approached me. I could see the cab was occupied by 2 men, 25 to 40 years of age. Then it stopped. The window rolled down. One man leaned out. "Hey, we are lost." Hey, friend. "We are lost. Can you tell me where?" That station is. The accent was not from the UK, and I'm not going to state its origin, as I'm not going to get into stereotypes. But alarm bells began to ring out immediately. What was a van doing out at this time, and why directions to the local train station in the middle of a Tier 4 lockdown? The van had stopped at the side door facing me. I stepped back a few paces and gave directions very quickly. I did not understand all. I think best if you show us. With that, he opens his door, and the side door to the van is wide open to reveal another 2 men. I turned and ran down the side street that I had emerged from. Yet take the van around, I follow him, knowing that these guys were fitter, younger than I, but raised to my apartment building was out of the question. The only advantage I had was a head start, and hopefully local knowledge of the streets. The side street leads into a larger street that has homes with all large edges. I ran past a few homes and entered the front garden of a house that had most imposing and opaque edge. It was unlit. I ducked down. Luckily for me, that house did not have a motion sensor light. Within a few seconds, I could hear footsteps. They went past me and stopped. I peeked through the hedge vegetation, very limited view, to see the man who had asked for directions. He was a few houses down from me and on the opposite side of the street. He was looking around. Then the sound of the vehicle. I thought, oh no, the van. amazing explanation if the house lights came on. Luckily, the house stayed unlit, and after my allotted time, I rose quickly, walked back to my apartment building, keeping to shadows and reacting to every little sound. I made it back. I bolted the front door. Only when I sat down did I understand what I just avoided. All of this for some air and a bottle of red wine. I poured myself a black coffee and debated calling the police, but what would I say? Had anything really happened that they could act on? No. Intuition of being kidnapped or being in danger is not enough evidence. Plus, being a man, this would not be a priority, especially on a night that they would be overstretched on already. I just waited in the new year, realizing that I had a lucky escape, and I should stock up on red wine at a more decent time. Good God, I'm glad he's okay. That's very scary. When I was little, my mother and I were followed home by two men in a white van from the grocery store. And as we started to come near our street, I had been watching them. And I said to my mom, "We are being followed." And she said, "Yes, what do we do?" I said, "Let's see if they're following us." So she turned down the opposite road. They followed. I said, "Speed up and turn quickly." They followed again. And then again. And we were going about 80 and 30 in a residential neighborhood. She said, "What do I do?" She was frantic and panicking. I said, "Drive to the police station." As we pull into the police station, they drove past us in a fury. Obviously, they weren't from around there. I don't know what they wanted. I don't think we ever saw them again, but not too long after that, my childhood dog, Heidi, a Rottweiler, was kidnapped, and I never saw her again. From a white van at the end of her cul-de-sac. That's on Let's Not Meet. See, what do we want to listen to next? You/Lacey and Laura. The New Year's Eve haunting. True story. When I was around 12, I spent New Year's Eve at my friend's house. Whilst our parents went out to a restaurant in a nearby town. The house was old and pretty isolated, and to be honest, scared the crap out of me. You had to drive up a long, overgrown track to reach it. A lot of my friends at school would say the house was absolutely haunted, and it was actually featured in a ghost book, if I remember correctly. So anyways, we sat downstairs in the lounge watching some TV and heard the loudest crashing sound. I still remember the look in my friend's eyes when we turned somewhere. It was cold, like ice cold. We moved down the hallway upstairs towards the wind and turned to go down another corridor. Bear in mind, this house was massive. Honestly, it was near enough a mansion from the early 1920s. At the end of the corridor was his mom and dad's room. The door was moving back and forth slowly. We both stopped and just stood still, frozen, not saying a word to each other. After a moment, my friend walked towards the door. I, still frozen in fear, fell behind a little as he pushed the door open and snuck into the room. The darkness consumed him. I could barely make out his silhouette. There was a perfect silence for a moment. A couple of seconds, a minute, 2 minutes before I heard him let out the most terrifying scream. My adrenaline kicked in. I ran towards the room to see what happened. I searched for the light, turned it on. He stood frozen, stiff and pale, staring into an empty corner of the room. Just to the side of him was a massive antique mirror that was smashed into pieces and scattered all over the floor. I placed my arm on his shoulder and asked him if he was okay. She broke the mirror. Who broke the mirror? He said, the woman in the corner. She told me. At that point, I was honestly like, screw this, and told him we should leave. He turned to leave with me, but just before we did, I wanted to check the mirror. Surely the wire had broken or something, I thought to myself. I bent down to the mirror and turned it over. The string that was holding it to the wall was intact. It hadn't snapped. I looked at the wall. The nail was still firmly fixed to the wall. At that point, I was so terrified I told him to call his parents and tell them to come home. We waited outside the front door until our parents arrived back from the restaurant. My dad went straight up to the bedroom to check it out. When they arrived and saw the broken mirror, they sort of pushed it off and said we were up to no good, playing a game that got out of hand. After that night, my friend never really spoke about it again. The worst part, recently, I'm now 24. I was having a general chat with my mom, and as New Year's is coming up, that night came up. I told her about it, and she said, I believe you. Your friend's mom told me a few days after that night she had seen a woman in her room telling her to leave the house. It honestly sent my whole body tingling, and I had flashbacks to that night. Although it's coming up on almost 12 years ago, it still scares me to death. So yeah, that would be absolutely scary. I'm sorry. I mean, what do you do? I mean, what do you do when you can really prove that something not just you saw, but an adult saw, and it was the same thing your friend saw? That's crazy. See, I'm trying to find New Year's Eve in the comments, because some of the really good stories we told them about the doorknob twisting, which apparently other people had happened to them as well, but we hadn't heard or seen anything at all the night she was robbed, which is sad because we were probably up until 5 a.m. We feel bad we were oblivious neighbors. Actually scary to think about what happens right next door or what is happening to you. And there's literally people on the other side of the wall, but they don't hear what is happening, so they can't help. Don't know you need help. Yes, I agree. I don't know if it was a difference in times. She's talking about it was the starting of the digital age, widespread media of the terrible things that happen to kids. I spent most of my entire childhood as a latchkey kid. I would wander my neighborhood and town since I was 6 years old, walking to the store and the ice skating rink by myself. I walked myself to first grade from the middle of town, 10 blocks away. I had always been an independent child, was raised that way. I think when my parents divorced, my mom just felt free. She wanted to go and do things she wasn't able to do before. This is the Florida story from the first story. Man, she's a pretty good kid. She always made sure that she had gotten to school. I mean, and she understood her mom needed freedom, but still. I wished my mom was here more when I was little. So this is from Deleted, but is the craziest New Year's story on RS Credit. I went to the club at Hard Rock with my friend and met up with some other people. We eventually started breaking off and I ended up talking to a couple of chicks. One was definitely into me more than the other one and we started kissing. After an hour of nonsense and foolishness, the girl I'd been messing with went to the bathroom. Moments later, her friend was up on me and we started kissing. Needless to say, I ensured the remainder of the evening would be interesting one way or another. For about an hour or so, I was messing around with both of them, but one of the girls was unaware. That's never good. My friend and myself, these two girls, decided to leave, so we went to the car and got in. I think they were giving us a ride to our car. That's what I thought. These two girls had been getting a little snappy with each other now, and it started getting more and more aggressive in nature. The next thing I know, the girl stopped her car in the parking garage, and these two girls get out and start fighting, rolling around on the ground. I was pretty drunk and was over all of that nonsense, so I just got out and walked away. A few minutes later, my friend called me to figure it out where it was. They picked me up and told me one of the girls got stabbed. Wow, well, that took a serious turn. more than 4,000 years. With such a long history, there are bound to be a myriad creepy stories about New Year's madness and mayhem, right? The creepiest things that have ever happened on New Year's Eve run the gamut from naked being down wearing a Ronald Reagan mask to people spotting otherworldly shadow creatures in the middle of the road. While most creepy stories are associated with Halloween, the New Year's Eve originally began when the Babylonians started a tradition of welcoming each new year with a massive religious festival called Akitu, according to history.com. The Phantom Dexter. Okay, so I used to watch General Hospital, so I'm dating myself here, and at one point, there was a mystery figure offing people in the sleepy town of Port Charles because each person received a text before the killer caught them in his trap. He became known as text message killer. One Reddit user had a similar New Year's Eve experience, and while no one was hurt, the phantom text would make anyone uneasy. Reddit user JA began receiving texts from an unknown user, which we read earlier. The Peeping Tom. One of my worst fears is seeing a strange face peering into the window. Mine too. This is exactly what happened to an Alabama couple on New Year's Eve 2015. Only the Peeping Tom was naked with a sock covering his genitals and wearing a Ronald Reagan mask. I know a lot of people are laughing about it, and honestly, it is kind of funny later on, but at the same time, it's very concerning. Danielle Yancey told Alabama media news site, "I don't know what he was planning on doing." Apparently, Danielle's husband got a glimpse of the naked Peeping Tom while he was taking out the trash, and a home security camera confirmed that it was not at all in his head. Police never caught the nude residential peeper and chalked the incident up to a drunken prank or lost bet. I hate when they do that, because somebody who's willing to walk around naked in other people's backyards and look in their house has some tendencies that are not healthy. So this one is pretty disturbing. A Florida man who told police he was angry with his mother who used an axe to decapitate her on New Year's Eve 2014. According to CNN, the creepiest part is the mugshot taken after the man was arrested. In the photo, he's smiling like one would for a childhood school picture. The man was apparently fed up with his mother nagging him about moving some boxes into the attic. Sheriff Bob Gualtieri even when you are. According to the website Wattpad, one woman had an unwelcome guest on New Year's Eve. One she could hear but not see. The trouble began when things started disappearing. The woman and her boyfriend kept losing items they were using only to have them reappear a few minutes later. Later in the evening, a strange man's voice joined the conversation, yelling, "Right," in response to a comment one of the guests made. Eventually, every guest heard an invisible person coughing in the bathroom, even though there was no one there. The strange activity stopped the next day. So perhaps the ghost just really liked the New Year's Eve festivities. There really aren't a lot of scary New Year's Eve stories that are new. Some of these I'd read the last few years. I guess a lot of people just get drunk and go to jail, and there's not a lot of murders or weird stuff that happens on New Year's. Sometimes the zombies come. Strange occurrences can be chalked up to having too much to drink, but Reddit user Hellbills310 claimed that despite partying until around 2:30 a.m. on New Year's Eve, the not quite human creature they and a friend encountered was real. That's when we saw it, something that looked like a naked person but wasn't quite human, waddled down the street towards us. It moved as though it were half squatting because its hands that dragged along the ground as they hung limp at its sides. I couldn't make out his face, and Max told me later that he couldn't either. It was also making a throaty gurgling noise. Gurgling. If it was almost choking on something. The author and Max did the only sensible thing. They got the hell out of there. Well, it's pretty likely that your New Year's Eve could go awry in a number of ways. Surging over prices, bad dates, even horse hangovers, and unmet expectations. You can now add Halloween-type creepy stuff to the list of reasons it might just be better to stay home on New Year's. 16 Airbnb story horrors you won't believe are true. Oh, these always terrify me. Terrify me. They just do. The flat that became a pop-up brothel. In an all-time tale of trusting your gut instincts, Colin found out the hard way that an Airbnb guest who wanted to pay cash rather than through the website should have been a red flag from the beginning. A quick Google of the guest's names led Colin to discover high-profile escorts who had been using the property with their clients. Upon arrival, he found empty wine and Prosecco bottles along with drugs and used things overflowing from the trash. He suspected the escorts made a grand total of more than $5,000 during their 2-night stay in his $85 a night rental. This should have known New Year's disaster. When Ricky Campbell booked Christina McCullen's London apartment for New Year's celebration, the host didn't think twice before accepting. A few hours and a few £1,000 worth of damage later, neighbors called McCullen to warn her of a 100-person strong party money she earned would help pay off some credit card debt. After checkout, Holly went home to check on the property and do a bit of cleaning. That's when she found the guests had lied about the purpose of their visit. In addition to finding drug paraphernalia, drugs, and other unidentifiable substances strewn across the apartment, Holly saw that her home had been completely destroyed. Valuable items had been stolen, expensive rugs used as ashtrays, and the only tiles left behind were blood-soaked. The guests and her visitors caused more than $10,000 AUD, Australian dollars worth of damage in total. The airborne Airbnb experience gone wrong. The idea behind music experiences was to bring people together for intimate, exclusive gigs. It did not, however, expect tourists to take advantage of this and hold an all-night rave in local apartments. Yeah, they're usually in warehouses. The party in question, fully equipped with professional sound system, bouncer to approve tickets, squeezing an apparent 200-plus people into a one-bedroom apartment, partying until 6 a.m., and this happened while the Airbnb host was away in Vietnam and couldn't do anything. But what if they don't? I mean, what if they don't want to leave? You know, you get somebody stuck in your house and they don't leave. You know what I mean? That would scare me. How about haunting New Year's Eve ghost stories? Well, we all love ghost stories. The woman in red at the Drake Hotel on New Year's Eve 1920. Just after opening the Drake Hotel in Chicago through a celebration to remember. Rich people and big-time celebrations from all over the world attended the party, excited to see the beautiful new buildings and ring in the new year. One of the attendees would become a part of history that night. Haunting history. A man and his fiancée were at the event. The fiancée, who was dressed in a vibrant red gown, caught her husband being disloyal. Torn apart by it, in a fit of rage and sadness, she threw herself from the 10th floor window, ending her own life. They thought they'd seen the last of the poor woman, but multiple sightings of the apparition in her red dress have been reported at the hotel since her demise. Some say that she's intent on replaying her final night, as she's typically seen wandering the 10th floor when she took her own life. She's also been seen roaming the hallways, seemingly unaware that she's passed over a century ago. New Year's Eve, Lady in White. Tales of a lady in white are common when it comes to ghosts, right? Most of these ghosts are stuck reliving the final moments of their lives over and over for decades and sometimes centuries. But do you know you have a powerful and potentially dangerous phantom on your hands when they have the ability to intrude? That's exactly what the New Year's Eve Lady in White does. For New Year's, the party hosts from all over the world have reported an uninvited guest that showed up to their celebration. This guest isn't seen entering the house. They just appear. Excuse me. They don't socialize. They don't eat or enjoy a beverage. They just roam at the party as if it were happening in their own home. If you see an uninvited guest dressed in white during New Year's celebration, you're getting a visit from the lady in white. Just ignore her and she will see herself out. But if you confront her or upset her, you can be sure behind me and I jump up, stand there looking. Sitting there on the couch was a tall, dark figure. My first instinct was to bum rush this man because, brotherly protection, of course. But it became more clear just what I was looking at. He had a long, black, pointy hooded robe. His head was down enough that I couldn't see inside the hood, and his arms were crossed, folded into each other. It took me a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I ran into the next room looking for something to hit it with. Found a baseball bat and clutched it tight as I stood there and tried to wrap my head around everything that just happened. I chalked it up to a pile of clothes on the couch before I gathered the courage to go back and check. I walk into the living room, slowly turn on the light, and where the figure was sitting was nothing. No clothes, nothing even remotely resembling what I saw. This would have been my last day at that job. I used to work in a nursing home. One day I had a resident refuse to get on the elevator with me, citing being scared of the little boy as a reason. Whatever, I shrugged it off until I had a resident come out of his room and ask me for candy for the little boy. I decided to ask my mom, who was the head nurse and employee of 13 years, about what had been happening. She told me that all through her years of employment, residents periodically reported seeing a young boy. He was always waiting and wanting to play. He appeared to all kinds of residents, from those of sound mental status to those with severe dementia. They all reported the exact same thing over a great period of time. When they moved to a new facility, the new boy came with them. The little boy was apparently particularly fond of those with limited eyesight. From those residents, the boy was described as having dark black hair, living out in a tent, and saying that he died when a tree fell on him. One night I was feeding a resident who had recently suffered a stroke. She had lost the use of her right hand and required total assistance. As I was feeding her, I felt a cold hand on my arm. Right then the resident said, "Was that your boyfriend? He looks a little young for you." I nearly cried. The resident who saw him passed away that night. At least you could market the house as being haunted, right? I grew up in a house on Long Island, specifically in Brentwood. It was a quiet town for its location. My dad worked as a taxi cab driver at the time, which meant he would usually end up coming home early in the evening, and I would always greet him. One Saturday after we had just moved in, I was watching cartoons as my dad came in. I ran to say hello. My mom hears from the bedroom and says, "Hello, honey. It's not ready yet." My dad and I think that's weird since it's 6 a.m. and we weren't planning on going swimming. But we brush it off, and he goes on to tell me his usual stories of the crazy people he meets that he picked up throughout the night. When we realized that it was Saturday and my mom was at work, it was only me and him in the house, but the voice sounded just like my mother. Fast forward a couple weeks and my new neighbors come over to welcome us to town. The neighbors consisted join her, but I declined, wanting to get everyone in the soccer game. I ran back to the others. The reaction of everyone as I asked them to get the other girl to join us was puzzling. One of the moms responded by saying, "We only have one daughter." Turns out a small brunette girl drowned in my pool 10 years ago, with her mother passing away soon after from a heart attack. Okay, well, I'm sorry the last few were not from New Year's Eve, but I wanted to give you a nice, long New Year's Eve I know I've kind of been like slacking and getting you out a long videos, but with the holidays it's been crazy, but everybody leaves tomorrow, so that means I have more time on my hands, more time. Body in the bathtub. So this happened around New Year's Eve by U-Odd manufacturer 9804. I have not shared this story online before, and I'm unsure what the experience even was. I was scared to tell anyone for years, in fact, because I thought nobody would think I was telling the truth. This happened around 6 years ago when my family and I moved into a new house on New Year's Eve, or thereabouts. At the time, we had only lived in the house around 8 or 9 months. We still live in this house. So coming up on Christmas and New Year's, generally kids go on to winter break from school, and my parents had gone out to do some last minute shopping, leaving me home alone for a little bit. I remember that when they left, it was around 3 p.m. in the afternoon. I wasn't tired. Obviously, I sat down on my bed for a few minutes. Despite the next thing I do, it was around 8 in the evening. I went to check my phone. I thought this was really bizarre. I could not remember anything within the time. Like in an instant, hours and hours had gone by, but I didn't feel like I was sleeping. Immediately, I felt like something was terribly wrong. I decided to push that feeling aside and try not to make myself paranoid. But because of the time that had passed, I thought it would be good time to take a shower before my parents got home. For reference, our bathtub shower has a sliding glass door, so you can have one side completely open to view in the shower if you'd like. I decided I would start the shower first and get my clothes and towel later. I headed to the bathroom right around the corner. When I went into the bathroom and flipped on the light, I briefly checked myself in the mirror, as I think anybody does before a shower. After I was done, I proceeded to look over to the bathtub. Struck with fear, I was frozen in place, horrified to see what looked like a gutted, decaying human body lying inside. The only thing I could compare it to is when you cut open an animal you've gotten from hunting I sat on the floor. I had my hands over my eyes, having no idea what to do. Especially, I had left my phone in my bedroom. When I sat down, I had not hit my head or anything, yet I proceeded to black out. I then only woke up when my parents had apparently come home and my father found me on the bathroom floor, still cold and perspiring a weird sweat, he said. I was pale as a ghost. He started shaking me awake and recalls I just wouldn't wake up, making them think I had a stroke or something worse. I couldn't talk for several minutes. All I could do was hysterically sob and cry out to him in fear about what had happened, that it was so flustered and inarticulate that he had no idea what I was saying. He just was so concerned how horrible I looked. To this day, I'm really confused and unnerved about what happened. Even if it's been several years, and I'm not sure if it's paranormal or something else. The body was not there when I woke up. I would be interested to know if anyone else has happened to experience something like this. It might have been a vision, or your parents might be killers, who knows? Odd things had happened. Believe me, I'm sure. Many serial killer kids and family members would agree it was the strangest day of their life when they found out that their family member was a murderer. Even Gacy's sister, even at the day of his execution, just was so up in arms that could not believe her brother would have done something like that. It sat at the foot of my bed. You powder fresh 86. So this was 2 years ago. New Year's Eve 2022, to be exact. I was putting something away I had borrowed from my mom back into their room when a sudden feeling of horrible dread fell over me. My father was in there asleep, and I felt the need to pray over him. I asked God to please protect him. Later that night, I had a weird dream. In this dream, I just finished washing and drying my bedsheet. I was attempting to straighten the bedsheet out by doing that flapping, shaking up the sheet we all do, then hold the ends and lift it up and down. Doing that multiple times until it landed on a human form sitting at the end of my bed. Oh my God, I'd be terrified. I was freaking out and quickly snatched the bedsheet off in fear. However, instead of nothing He said his back and stomach were really in pain. I told him to please go to the hospital right away, as I had a really horrible feeling. This dream kept coming back to my mind, and the thing I saw looked like a physical representation of a sickness. After some serious convincing, he went to the trauma hospital, which luckily was around the corner. He almost didn't make it by mere minutes. He had an aortic dissection. An aortic dissection is deadly if not treated. He had let it go on untreated for the past few days and was at the end where it would have killed him if he hadn't gone. What it is a tear in the inner layer of the body's main artery. One basically bleeds out on the inside, depriving the vital organs of oxygen and blood. My best friend had one, and he has less than 5% survival rate as he bled out for 3 days before surgery, which was similar to my father. He survived, which is a medical miracle, due to staying by his side almost the whole time. He was hospitalized over 100 days. I am extremely well versed in this condition, surgeries and long recovery periods. My dad was blessed, as his was found as well before he passed. His surgery successful though long. He only stayed in hospital the whole month of January. The surgeon said his recovery was the fastest he had ever witnessed. A terrifying situation. But what confuses me to this day is that thing I saw. A warning, perhaps. That is my best guess. A very, very creepy warning. That is terrifying. Can you imagine? Oh my goodness. You/unlucky froggy. I accidentally bought a haunted necklace. So a little while ago I was Christmas shopping. I was at a thrift store. Yeah, I was there looking for weird, creepy stuff to add to my weird, creepy collection. That's when I noticed this necklace made of string with a clay sculpted mask hanging from it. For some reason I was instantly drawn to it like a magnet. I had to have it. My sister was with me and immediately told me to leave it behind. She said it gave her instant, uneasy feelings of despair. But I didn't care. I loved how eerie it was, and it was speaking to me. I tried it on and thought it looked perfect. As I got home, I put it into my bookcase at the foot of my bed and thought some reason I skipped this step. For some reason I never even thought about it. That night I hung the necklace on my bookcase. The nightmares started. At first they were mildly unsettling, but not horrible. Yet every night they got worse. By the third night, I was so freaked out I had to sleep with the lights on. By the fifth night, they turned into full-on night terrors. I would sit up in bed, drenched in sweat, panting like I'd just run a marathon, heart pounding out of my chest. But here's the thing, and I have experienced this before, so I know what she's talking about. It wasn't me. I would wake up and feel like I'd been somewhere else. And I realized after I started talking about these things to my sister that it didn't just happen to me. You see, after the fifth night, my sister told me she had been having intense, horrible nightmares for the past two nights in a row. Her room is right next to mine, but I never said anything about nightmares. I figured it was just a coincidence. But then the sixth night, my mom mentioned at the breakfast table she had a restless night as well and had some really unsettling nightmares. Now her room is on the floor above ours. That's when I finally said something. I told them I've been having nightmares every single night since I got that necklace at the thrift store. I made a joke that it was the necklace causing all this. When my sister and mom heard what I had to say, they were stone cold silent. Nobody was laughing at my presented joke, quote unquote. They both told me to get rid of it immediately. But I couldn't. I don't know why. Something in me didn't want to let it go. I figured I would cleanse the house and the necklace just to be on the safe side. That very night I went to bed telling myself everything would be fine. But it wasn't. Let me just tell you that on the seventh night, I had the worst nightmare of my life. Let me try to explain. There was this being in it. The description was kind of grotesque. Creature with black hairy limbs, bent in odd, distorted ways, but it looked partially human. His hands held the low in front of its body. The body was kind of round just as I started to snap out of my dream, I saw the creature once again. It ran away, crouched low like some twisted little animal, part human, part creature, and disappeared behind my desk. The next morning I told my mom everything. She didn't even give me the chance to argue. Smart woman. She told me to get rid of it immediately. Honestly, at that point, I really wanted to. But some part of me was terrified now at getting rid of it. What if getting rid of it made things worse? Did I give it away as a gift? Did I take it back to where I got it? You know, there's things that will actually latch onto you, and no matter what you do, that was just a conduit to reach somebody in this world. So I did some research and decided to do a binding ritual. Very smart. I've done many of those. To make sure whatever was attached to the necklace stayed with the necklace. I used white cloth, salt, herbs, and drew protective sigils on it. I meditated, focusing on binding the energy or entity to the necklace, banishing whatever it was from me, my family, and my house. Now, I'm gonna give a little bit of advice here. Always specify a circumference around you, like 1,000 miles, 100 miles, some kind of barrier that the thing is guaranteed not to be able to reach per specification. The more specific you are about what you want for yourself and what you're binding the creature of is so important. Right, continuing on. When I tried to light incense during the ritual, the first match broke. The second went out instantly. This woman has something very deadly on her necklace in her house. The third flared up, and the tip of the match flew off, landing on my bed, starting a tiny fire, putting a black hole on my comforter. Panicked, I quickly put it out before it could burn the whole thing, but the entire ritual left me feeling this deep sense of dread. You have to push through once you start one of these things. I'm telling you, please don't give up. I pushed through. What she should have brought to help her with the ritual was her sister and mom. The more power you have in people that believe in this kind of stuff is so important as well. So after cleansing myself, my mom, my sister, and our house, I wrapped the necklace in the cloth, tied it with string, sealed it with wax, and locked it with a padlock, hopefully in a box that also had a protection spell on it. I threw it away in the dog bin where we put his brother was terrified tonight, and his reaction scared the crap out of me. It was around Christmas, New Year's Day. I am 24 and I live with my aunt, her husband, and their 2 kids. A girl who's 15 and a boy who's 2 years old. My biological sisters and I pretty much help raise our kids, so we see them as bonus siblings. The 15-year-old is sleeping over at a friend's house, and my uncle is at work. My aunt was decorating a float for a Christmas parade that weekend. That I do remember. I was home alone with the 2-year-old from 4:30 to 10 at night. I'm used to sitting for him, and besides the standard toddler antics, he's a great kid. About an hour before she came home, I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, while her 2-year-old son was in the living room playing with his toys and watching cartoons. Out of nowhere, I hear him let out this weird, terrified scream, and he came running into the kitchen, freaking out. As soon as he saw me, he waddled over and clung onto my pant leg and wouldn't let go. I picked the little guy up, and he buried his face in my hoodie while he was still crying. I asked him, what's wrong, kiddo? He kept pointing to the front door, saying, door, 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 but in a different voice than we had ever heard. My aunt and I looked at each other, and according to both my aunt and uncle, the house has a history. Before my uncle bought it in '89, 2 brothers allegedly killed each other on the property. Knowing this, I felt uneasy from time to time. And while my brother has done odd things before, never had I seen him get this scared ever. Whenever he saw it scares me too. With the alleged deadly history of this house, I don't doubt that something still lingers here even decades later. We do know, however, that there's a protective spirit among us. My aunt's late grandfather, still seeing him petrified has me shaken to my core. Always trust your little ones. They absolutely see spirits we do not. Their souls are much more open and less jaded than ours. Trust them, I promise you. I promise. You won't have to deal with things yourself if you know what it is. Stranger who slept beside me. U/critical loan 6006. This happened when my close family visited the house of my grandmother's sister. I have to admit that the house is infamous for its eerie stories. At midnight, music would start playing out of nowhere, continuing to play until somebody physically went upstairs and turned it off. I never wanted to go, but staying home alone wasn't an option either. Knots in my stomach never forget. I decided to go to sleep early. I wanted to catch the morning ferry. I wanted to get out of there. I was sharing a room with two of my uncles and an aunt. All my parents and grandmother slept in a separate room. We had our holiday joys and I was ready to leave. Already a cramped space with their loud snoring. Sleep was going to be impossible, or had been impossible. By 11 p.m. I was still wide awake. My mom's cousin, who had gone to a party earlier that evening, was supposed to return home at midnight. I texted her asking her to bring food, but she never replied. I stayed up hoping she'd show up eventually. I must have drifted off to sleep because I suddenly woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. They were very slow and deliberate, and they grew louder as they approached the room I was sleeping in. The door creaked open. My heart pounded in the silence as a dark, tall figure stood in the doorway, unmoving. In the faint moonlight spilling through the window, I could make out a dark silhouette. I froze, clutched my blanket until the figure finally stepped inside and walked towards me. I thought for sure this was somebody in my family, maybe my mom's cousin. I told myself that over and over as this thing kept walking closer. I remembered she wore a dark nightgown, and her long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders. But as she got closer, without a word, she slipped into the small space beside me. I remember thinking that this person was not my cousin's mom. I whispered, "Why are you sleeping here? It's already so cramped." She didn't respond. The weight of her tiny body seemed heavy as it pressed into the bed. I felt the cool strands of hair brushing against my arm. But there was something about her silence that made my skin crawl. I did not want this to be anything horrific, so I convinced myself that she had just was tired and maybe drunk from the party. I scooted over carefully, not wanting to accidentally bump her face, since she'd just gotten a nose job. Oh. The room felt impossibly still as I lay there, eyes wide open. At this point, I still wasn't sure if this was any one of my family members. I was listening to the rhythmic breathing of my relatives around me, and eventually I fell asleep. The next morning I woke up, my mom shaking me. "Honey, breakfast is ready. I've been calling you for 20 minutes. Get up. We need to pack." At the dining table, I saw my mom's cousin and couldn't resist teasing her. "Next time, if you're going to cram into our room, at least bring food. You know how hungry I was last night." She looked up from her breakfast, genuinely confused, frowning at me. "What are you talking about? I blacked out at the party and didn't even get home until this morning." "Haha, very funny." I stared processing these words that were coming out of her mouth. Stop messing with me, seriously. You were literally in our room. You slept beside me. Her face went white as a ghost. I wasn't here, she said, her voice low. A cold red spread through me. I turned to the rest of the family, desperate for answers. Everyone swore they'd stayed in their own rooms all night. My uncles and aunt had still been fast asleep when I woke up. A feeling of nausea came over me as I went back to the room and packed my things. The bed looked exactly as we left it, except for one thing. On the pillow where whoever this was had slept was a single strand of long black hair. No one else in the house had long hair. To this day, I still have no idea who or what slept beside me. Wow. Alright, that is truly, truly terrifying. I don't even know how I would ever sleep again. I really don't. Would you? Of a true story a native inmate told me. Bayou/Bia, 1999. So a few years ago, I had been locked up on New Year's Eve after a few drinks too many and got pulled over. But this is an old story from a few years back. I was just reminded of it a couple days ago when retelling it, and I'm curious if anyone else has ever heard of this, or if it was made up by the person who told me. So, many years ago, I was working as a food inspector, and I happened to go into a maximum security prison, and there I was in charge of overseeing the production of food. Not a CO by any means, and I was able to talk to the inmates very frequently. One early morning I was doing paperwork when one of the inmates was doing some sort of stalking, and we were talking about urban legends. Okay, so he was in jail on New Year's for a few hours. I guess he was drunk. Maybe this is why. Okay, this makes sense. One early morning I was doing paperwork when one of the inmates was doing some sort of stalking, and we were just talking about urban legends. The man, a native, I think Navajo, but I could be wrong. Storm was his name. Storm told me about a legend, an experience he had on his reserve about some sort of devil. A devil they called Ufe. He claims there is this handsome man with a tall white cowboy hat and boots that frequently goes into casinos. He doesn't gamble, he flirts with beautiful young women and lures them out of the casino. Once he takes these women to his home, he transforms into a tall creature with his shaggy goat legs and long black hair. His beautiful face turned into a mix of demonic creature of a horse and a wolf with piercing red eyes. devours these women and leaves their clothing around his homestead as a memento of his killings. I kind of chuckled to myself because it sounded like a typical monster. But Storm's face is not laughing. He's very serious and then tells me that he himself had a close encounter with the creature. He barely made it out alive. Storm and his cousin lived in Arizona reservation on the other side of the south mountain, very close to my hometown in Estrella Mountain. One day, he and his cousins were drinking and tried to pass the time, as there wasn't much else to do. They decided to take a walk into the desert for the hell of it. Maybe not such a great idea. It was about half an hour or so from sundown. The two tread off in a direction to enjoy the scenery of the plains desert as the sun went down and made multiple beautiful colors across the sky. They walk for 15 minutes or so, and all of a sudden they come across this abandoned church-like building. Old and decrepit with weak wooden structures that looked as though a stiff wind could break down the structure. The two men walked through the church and out the back, walking through broken pews and the floor creaking with each step. They laughed about how freaky and weird the old building was before slowly making their way out. They walked out the door and jumped over a trench just past the back end of the church. The pair continued to walk and laugh when they came across something strange. Storm says what they saw was a wide arrangement of women's muddied high heels, black flats, torn brown pump shoes. Yes, an assortment of women's shoes scattered around them that were broken and dirty, clearly abandoned for quite a while. Storm picked up his shoe to inspect it when he turned to his cousin to look. The look on his cousin's face was that of complete and utter horror. His face was pale and his eyes were wide, close to tearing up, and he was looking behind Storm. Storm was about to turn around when his cousin stopped him. "No," he whispers, placing his hands on Storm's shoulders. "Don't look up. Keep your head down, man." Frightened, Storm follows his cousin's words. He had never seen his cousin so afraid. Then he heard it. A pair of heavy footsteps walking behind them. The sound of labored breathing matching with the steps. Storm feels as though his whole body fell 10 degrees colder. He was shivering out of control, shoulders shaking, when his cousin pulled his hand and stepped back slowly. "We need to go." His voice was nearly lost in the heavy steps behind him, but Storm heard him barely. "Whatever you do not look back," was the last thing his cousin told him before he booked it. The pair ran as fast as they could, sprinting past the old church, running to their homestead. His cousin yelled out native prayers and hopes that some sort of ancestral guardian could stop this beast. All the Thankfully, they safely made it inside their home just as the sun was setting, bathing their home in a warm orange glow. Panting uncontrollably against the wall, Storm placed a hand over his fast-beating heart. Scared of what he might see, but he had to know, Storm stumbled to an outside window and pulled back a blind, peering out into the dusking landscape. In the direction that they came from, Storm could see the back of the creature walking away. At least 8 foot tall, with long, silky black hair that reached its waist. A waist where human legs would be, but instead it was a pair of long goat-like legs with black stamping hooves that kicked up dust as it walked. That's terrible. SWs, which I always call them because I don't like to speak their name, scared the crap out of me, I swear. Alright, do we have time for one more? Creepy Stalker, you Dundra Queen 8812. So this happened years ago when I was going to college. I noticed when I was driving home from school that it seemed like someone was following me. I pulled into a convenience store, picked up a couple things, and thought the person gave up. When I pulled out, I saw them pull out from where they had parked a bit away and began to follow me again. When I drove into my apartment complex, I drove all the way around the complex past my apartment and then pulled up in front of the security office. This guy then took off. That was following me. About a month later, around Christmas, we had a lot of snow. I lived in a studio apartment by myself on the second floor. I had a big bay window that took up a good part of the wall of my apartment. My bed was in front of this window. I kept the shades closed all the time due to how exposing this was. When you would walk up the stairs to get to the apartment, if you walk straight, you would walk right up to my door. But if you turned to the left, you could walk right in front of my window. So it snowed during the night I slept. When I got up in the morning, there were footsteps up to my door, then pacing in front of my window. You could clearly see where someone stood there for a while at my window while I slept. Needless to say, this scared the crap out of me and didn't help sleep. I had to move out soon after that for my own protection. That's terrible. People you don't know who's watching you, like I said earlier in this video, if you heard me. Some people on these Reddit threads will say